Hey guys, Parfax here, and today we are ranking every weapon in New World. All right, let's get started. Now, today we are ranking every weapon in New World, and this is not my tier list. This is your guys's, rankings. We're not going to really do a tier list. I know these are tiers, but we're going to rank the weapons from worst to first. Now, we have the Greatsword in here as well, so we will put it on the list where you guys put it, but it's way too early to decide where this actual weapon will go. We'll need about probably a month to 2 months to see where this weapon, ends up, but we'll see where you guys think it is. And what I did was I put a bunch of polls up on my YouTube channel with over, I think, 20,000 votes. You guys have now came up with this list. If you want to see me do a live tier list, stream it on YouTube, let me know in the comment section down below, or maybe even stream it on Twitch. And maybe you guys can help me out with an actual tier list. We can put everything in categories from S to D to F, whatever. But I want to do this, and I do this every now and again to kind of see where you guys are at and to really not get as much hate in the comment sections down below. Because every time we do tier list, people do like on me because this isn't my list. Now, I'm going to give you my opinion as we go through this, but we're going to see where you guys rank these weapons. So we are going to start at the worst weapon and we're going to work our way up. All right, let's get started. So the worst weapon in the game, according to you, honestly, I was very surprised. This weapon, in my opinion, is actually very good and is one of the most important weapons in the game. Not only is it a DPS weapon, not only is it a support weapon, but it is one of the most important weapons when it comes to war and the most powerful weapons when it comes to war. And you guys ranked the Void Gauntlet dead last. Now, I think this is because most of you just want to run a straight DPS Void Gauntlet and you're like, well, it doesn't do a ton of DPS. Well, I know it doesn't do DPS, but the amount of utility this weapon provides is absolutely crazy. VG-IG builds are some of the strongest builds in war. If you do not have enough of them or you do not have them, you are just not going to win. This weapon is so good for support, but I understand most people were trying to play Void Blade, kind of play that DPS playstyle. And when it comes to that, this weapon kind of lacks now. Void Blade's not terrible, but it's definitely not there considering now the meta has shifted since the Void Gauntlet, has been put in to being very bursty. And that's just not something that the Void Gauntlet provides. So I understand why people put it here, but saying it's the worst weapon in the game, I think it's a lot closer to the best weapon in the game when it comes to importance for the game. And that's because it's support. But you can see here, you're going to, go down this list and you guys can see you guys didn't rate support weapons very high other than one, but you probably can, guess. Well, I guess technically two, but you really didn't guess, you guys really didn't rate support weapons very high. But Void Gauntlet being the worst weapon in the game, I really disagree. And speaking of weapons that are extremely important and super valuable, and one of the most important weapons in war, you guys ranked next the Warhammer. Now, I understand this because the Warhammer in small scale situations is honestly a pretty bad weapon. Its abilities are, well, very telegraphed. It's very easy to dodge these, and in 1v1 situations especially, the Warhammer really lacks. But when you start getting into big group play and start doing, big scale PvP, wars, etc., even OPR, this weapon starts to really shine. Now, this is a weapon that you have to catch people off guard with or get them in a previous stun. So I can very much understand why people put this at C, or not C, but the second worst weapon in the game. I would probably put it down here when it comes to OPR as well. I don't think it necessarily needs a buff, but I just think that it really has its case, and that is really war. I don't think you can really buff this weapon too much because, let's be honest, you get caught in some instances. If you're in light armor, you get caught in 1 CC from the Warhammer, you're probably just dead unless you have about 4 freedom perks. All right, next we have our first full DPS weapon. This weapon is, I wouldn't say one of my favorite. I used to play it a ton. I've been going more with like a sword and shield play style lately. I've been loving that, but it is the Fire Staff. So I understand the fire staff is actually, in my opinion, very oppressive, but you have to play it on the flamethrower side. And the reason why is because you just can't stop the flamethrower. I think if they put a cooldown on flamethrower, then flamethrower wouldn't be nearly as oppressive, but it probably does need a little bit of love when it comes to the damage side. I think Fireball is fine, but I think some of its other skills probably need a little bit of a bump up. It is also a weapon that scales off of crit, which is just a natural, a bad place to be. And that's where you'll see the int items or the int weapons are all down here pretty low because they don't have an alternative way to scale their damage. All the strength users, all the melees, they actually have other ways to scale their damage, but Fire Staff, Void Gauntlet, Ice Gauntlet, they have to scale off of crit. And with everybody running full resilient and running 150 con, or at least most people are, it's hard to really bust through that big damage spike. But the Fire Staff, it's a fun weapon, but it's just not super good right now. It's not horrible. You can definitely use it, and people use it all the time, and especially it's a pretty good weapon in 3v3 arenas if you're using the flamethrower build. But outside of the flamethrower build, the Fire Staff is definitely lacking. Now, we do have a build coming up with Sword and Shield Fire Staff. I've already got a lot of hours, probably about 4 hours of playing it in PvP. So look for that coming up probably this Friday. It was actually a lot of fun and actually did pretty dang well. So look for that build if you are looking for, a fun little Fire Staff build. Next, it really hurts me to say the weapon you guys ranked 4th to last is the sword. And I actually very much disagree with this. So the reason why is I understand that this is definitely more of a 1v1 weapon. The sword's tanking ability in PvP is really not there. You're not really going to tank with the sword. You can, but tanking in New World for PvP really doesn't do a lot. You can, and if you're going to, honestly, if you're going to tank in New World for PvP, you'd be better off going VGIG, Void Gauntlet, Ice Gauntlet, or Great Axe Warhammer to provide utility. The sword doesn't provide any of that utility. All it does is provide either extra damage if you have the left side of the tree ultimate or leadership, or it provides some tankiness if you're basically standing on top of the sword and shield user if you're on the right side of the tree. So I understand why people rank this low. But when it comes to 1v1 potential, the sword is actually one of my favorite weapons in the game. The amount of pressure this weapon puts out, the tracking on it, it has one of the best stuns in the game. It has one of the best get out of jail tools with shield rush, and it has one of the best gap closers in leaping strike. So I absolutely love this weapon. I understand why people ranked it pretty low. It is more of a situational weapon than just an overall great weapon, but it does hurt my heart a little bit to see it so far down the list. But hey, give it some love, buff it. I would absolutely love to see it buffed because, I'm using it already a lot, so seeing it buffed is not going to hurt my feelings at all. Next on our list to round out the tiers or to round out this sort of this level, what we're going to do here is we're going to do 4, 4, 3, and 1. So we are going to put, and I can't believe we're putting this here, the Great Axe. My thing with the Great Axe is I believe you guys are all running it incorrectly. This is a pretty controversial pick. I think the Great Axe is overall, I would definitely put this as probably the 3rd best weapon in the game. And I don't think it's actually very close. The reason is people run this, they run their typical war build. They see everybody, they put out these clips of people running war builds, and that's what they run, and they don't ever switch it up. When you're doing something like OPR, which is I think where 90% of the player base gets their PvP experience fund, which is when I do my videos, I always do OPR videos and not war videos or even 3v3 videos. And that's because people run the same build and they don't really switch it up. I really think that if you need to run like things like Charge and Reap, Gravity Well with the left side of the tree ultimate of Bloodlust, and I can't remember exactly what it's called, but you run that tree, the Great Axe is actually really good. You can use your heavies for that big burst damage. You have 2 catching tools with Reap, especially if you're running the hook, Reap and Gravwell, and then you have a catch tool or a get out of jail free tool if you can use it properly in Charge or somebody's just not in your way. I think maybe if you wanted to give the Great Axe a buff, Maybe make charge just go through people. Like, you know, it's really horrible that it just runs into people. And some people is just like doing their stupid little jump side to side movement, and they just your teammate runs into you, and now you're dead because your teammate just was doing some dumb jump movement. Um, but I understand why people are down here because they want to run Maelstrom, Gravity Well, maybe even Reap. They're running some big war build, and they're expecting to go into OPR and just, you know, play a war style when OPR is not war. If you had your team set up like a war team and you had this, you'd feel absolutely like a god. If you have the Bruisers, the VGIGs, and the healers, Bruiser's the best build in the game to play. But if you don't have that, you really have to have a play style that really caters to that, you know, open field-esque play style, which I just don't think people actually gear for. So we have that down here as the fifth worst weapon in the game, which I really disagree with. This is the worst one so far, I think, in my opinion. Well, I don't know, VG and this one. I understand why these three are right here, but these two, this is almost criminal. Like, these two are not near down here on the list. I can see if you want to take these and put these up here in A tier or up here towards the top of this list, but these are, in my opinion, nowhere near the bottom of the list. The next on our list, which I was a little bit surprised about as well, and that is Spear. So, in my opinion, this is about where Spear probably should be. Spear is very single target focused. It has a lot of CC, but it has a lot of pressure damage as well. Now, honestly, I would prefer to play with Sword over Spear, but that's just because I don't like Spear. But Spear has a lot of CC potential. It doesn't have, where it lacks is really its gap closing potential. Skewer is not a gap closer. I don't care. You can basically walk as fast as that. And if you miss it, then well, you get that little, like, not a cooldown, but you get like a slow after the skewer has actually went off. So you really don't get any actual like distance from it. You will get distance on it if you hit the target, and that's because, you know, you get that little like burst and hit, but they'll still be able to just walk away. So yeah, spear is a decent weapon, and I don't play it that much because I don't really like the weapon. But I think a great spear player is very, very like hard to handle. Next, we have another what I consider to be support weapon, and it is absolutely crazy good. I put out my Blunderbus video with this weapon not that long ago, and it is legitimately probably the most powerful build that I've ever played, and that is Ice Gauntlet. What is there more to say about Ice Gauntlet? People really complain that they, you know, nerfed the root, and I understand that, but if it wasn't, if we still had that root, this would so easily be the best weapon in the game if the roots were the same way they were. Because not only did you have it from shower, you had it, you had it from your passive once you hit them with a storm. This weapon is still very much an absolutely crazy good weapon. People just look at what it was and not what it is. If you guys would have never had that weapon in your arsenal, if it never worked that way, you guys would probably rank this a little bit higher. But I mean, we're still here. We're actually starting now contend with some of the best weapons in the game. So I can understand why this is here. We're right at the middle of the pack, which this means this weapon is very much a good weapon, but maybe not quite as OP. And I think the reason why people rank it lower, like I said, is because they remember what it used to be. People don't like Ice Shower. Ice Shower is still crazy good. I have killed so many people, and it is such an area denial when it comes to OPR. It is absolutely crazy. Anybody that says Shower is bad just hasn't played with it or doesn't play with it correctly. So, you know, it is what it is, but Shower is crazy good still. And this weapon is probably overall the best support weapon in the game. And you can honestly play with the Ice Gauntlet with any other weapon in the game. I honestly believe it. Next, we have everybody's favorite weapon, the musket. The musket, the nuisance on the rock, the easy to kill up close, unless they have a weapon we haven't talked about, the musket. Oh, man, they really just need to rework this weapon. If they're not going to rework it, I think they take away the zoom and give it something else. Maybe give it a little bit more. You guys are going to hate me for saying this. Maybe give it a little bit more damage, but take away the zoom, or give it some form of CC. Maybe rework the trap to make it actually usable. as a, as something that can CC but take away the zoom. I think the zoom is the big problem on this weapon. If they didn't have the zoom, they wouldn't be able to sit from so far away and hit you. You wouldn't die without even knowing where you got shot from. So I think if they just did that without, I think the weapon just needs a rework in general. Everybody's gonna say hit scan, hit scan. But I don't think hit scan is honestly that big of a problem. I think it's how far away they stay and you just can't interact with them is the big problem. The only counter to a musket is a musket, which I think is a huge problem. So, yes, musket here. We knew it was going to be somewhere towards the top of the list, and it is for sure. And the next weapon on our list is musket's favorite friend. Well, I shouldn't say friend, kind of counterpart that people like to complain about, and that is bow. You guys know bow is one of my favorite weapons in the game, and honestly, this is where I think the bow should be. Right around here, it's definitely not a bad weapon, but definitely not the best weapon. I know everybody says bow PR, and I had a video all about why bow PR is not really a thing, or why bow is not overpowered in OPR, but bow, it is a very good stat stick. It doesn't have really any good CC. It has a couple minor staggers. It has some haste, but essentially, it is the dex version of the fire staff. You have a little bit of tools to get away, and you just basically put out damage. Now, the bow does definitely more damage than the fire staff by itself. The fire staff gets paired with ice gauntlet, then it can do more damage. But the bow just has a lot of tools that do a lot more burst damage, which is the reason why the bow is up here above the fire staff. And the bow, of course, has better range. Now, the fire staff is easier to hit, and its abilities are a little bit more fluid to cast, but the bow is still very good and obviously was going to be towards the top of the list. Next, we have, I think this one's going to be a little controversial, but I mean, we do have some really good weapons after this, but is the life staff. We're getting towards the very top of this list, and you knew the life staff was going to be here. Now, we know some people, I've talked to a few life staff users, and some of them don't think it is very high up there, and I think that's just because they die every now and again. But let's be honest, the life staff is obviously one of the best weapons in the game. It takes 3 people most of the time to kill a life staff user, especially if they have rapier. If they have rapier, they probably just get away anyway. If you're a life staff user with rapier, I mean, you guys know, you just troll people all the time because they just can't kill you. But we knew it's up there, but it is the only healing weapon in the game, so it's really hard for it not to be up here. I think the game would be just naturally bad if it was down here towards the bottom of the list, because then people just wouldn't play it. So it's up here. We knew it was going to be towards the top, but we only have 3/4 weapons to go. So which one is it going to be? What do you guys think? Do you think next one's hatchet, blunderbuss, rapier? And greatsword, to be fair, is not actually, we haven't hit where people think the greatsword's going to be. So we'll put it where you guys think it's going to be. So the next on the list, I think you guys can all probably guess this, is hatchet. Hatchet with its Defy Death, which everybody hates. I don't know everybody gets so tilted about Defy Death. It has in my opinion, the best single ability in the game with Berserk. Berserk is so crazy. Defy Death is maybe one of the best ultimates in the game for sure. It pairs so well with the hatchet. The hatchet, you're big, you're kind of, big damage single target weapon. It's really good. The amount of burst damage it puts out with consistent damage is pretty crazy. It does lack in the form of CC. That's why it's typically paired with something like the sword, maybe spear, maybe great axe. It's paired with one of those weapons to provide absolutely crazy amounts of damage. It does have a really nice buff to Feral Rush. Feral Rush got a buff a couple months back now with its perk. Its perk now actually slows if you hit the target with only 1 hit. So the hatchet, obviously in a good place. I don't think it's overpowered by any stretch, but I definitely think that it is going to be a good weapon for a long time. Now, before we get to the best weapon, after we go through and we put the best weapon on there, we put the greatsword where it's going to be, I do want to say that we do have a couple little fun little notables after we pick the best weapon. So if you want to stick around for there, it won't take but 2 minutes. We're just going to go over what you guys rated was the most OP, the least OP, that kind of thing. All right. So the second best weapon in your opinion in New World currently, it's either the blunderbuss or the rapier, and it is the blunderbuss. Obviously, I picked up this weapon recently and absolutely was floored by it. This weapon does so much damage, and it is so good. I definitely agree with this weapon being this high on the list. It is very, very, very good. It provides, it's actually just so tanky. It provides so much burst damage and can provide pretty consistent damage if it's, you're close enough to them. It is a little bit of a harder weapon to land its shots, but you can, not zoom in to provide a little bit less damage, but more consistent damage because, let's be honest, people jumping around and doing their little jump hops, dives, and dodging and all that stuff. Sometimes it can be kind of hard to hit, but this weapon is the highest burst damage in the game, and I don't think it's really close. It's crazy good. And then the best weapon in the game, rated by you guys, is the rapier. Now, the rapier did get some nerfs on the PTR, which I think is actually going to make it pretty much, I think it's actually going to move down the list. We will see. It got a couple different nerfs. It got a pretty big nerf to riposte. And riposte actually, I believe, I have to go test it. I was told from a buddy that the iframe time on riposte is lower. And then, of course, we saw in the patch notes where once you actually successfully riposte somebody, you now are not invulnerable, basically like you were before. Not invulnerable, but you couldn't be CC'd. Now I think you can. And then we have the evade nerf, which is actually a bigger nerf. And it is if you don't evade an actual ability or a basic attack, something like that, then you will not get the extra stamina, which is a huge tool for the rapier's version of getting away. That is like how they get away is with evade. So you guys ranked it the best weapon in the game. And if you're curious to where the Greatsword ranked, you guys ranked it right about here. No, I'm just kidding. You guys ranked it the best weapon in the game. Now, obviously, I shouldn't say obviously, because I don't know if I've actually made my opinions made. I definitely don't think the Greatsword will be the best weapon in the game. I think everybody's going to play it, and I think everybody is going to find out really well where Greatsword's weaknesses are. The Greatsword does crazy damage and can be very tanky. But if you are not building tanky with this, people are going to just absolutely one-shot you when you go into your onslaught tree if you don't know what you're doing. And two, if you're just getting into the defiance side of the tree, you're just going to randomly get your block broken in a lot of circumstances. So I definitely think the Greatsword is going to be a good weapon, but I think it's definitely going to be more around here than it is up here. But of course, everybody like myself putting out videos about the Greatsword. Everybody's super hyped about the Greatsword. It does a lot of damage, but it does that in the cost of getting itself killed. And honestly, the right side of the tree, in my opinion, for the Greatsword is better than the left side of the tree. So the defensive side is better than the offensive side. So we will see when it comes out. The Greatsword is going to be a ton of fun to use. I'm going to craft 50 of them. I will record it. If I might be streaming. We haven't decided that yet or not, but we will craft 50 of them as soon as we get into the game, Brimstone Day, with stopwatches. I know they're going to be con, but it'll be right around 50 stopwatches to craft Greatswords with, and we'll see if we can make some big money on some Greatsword crafts and get myself a pretty good Greatsword as well. But all right, guys, we just have a couple little stats here, and then we will finish off the video. So when it comes to the most overpowered weapon, you guys had the most votes for Blunderbus. You had the most votes for, what weapon is top tier. And you had actually a three-way tie with Great Axe, Greatsword, and Rapier, which is funny because at top tier, you guys had Great Axe, which I believe, right? Because if you didn't know, how we ranked them was actually, needs nerfed, is top tier, is average, and needs buffed. That's how we ranked them. And you guys said the Great Axe tied with Greatsword and Rapier as a top tier weapon, but yet the Greatsword was down here because a lot of people put it as very average and almost nobody put it as OP. And then we had for the most average weapon, no surprise here, we had Void Gauntlet, and the weapon that people say needs buff the most is the Fire Staff. The people that said the weapons were the OP the least, no surprise here, was a tie for Void Gauntlet and Warhammer. The people that said this weapon was top tier the least, got the least amount of votes, was actually Musket. and a Void Gauntlet. And then people that said this weapon was average least amount of times was actually the Rapier. And the last one, the weapon that people didn't think needed a buff, with no surprise here, is actually Rapier and Greatsword. All right, guys, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comment section down below where you guys think these weapons stand. Where do you disagree? The one thing that I will say about this was most people put these weapons very high. So I think that's actually a great thing for New World. People put very rarely did people put that needed buff. I think the weapon that needed buff the most was Fire Staff, and it was only like 10% of the people said that the weapon needed buff. Everything else, everybody basically put them into the average or OP or top tier. That is where 90, I shouldn't say 90, probably about 70% of all the votes, or I guess probably not 70, we'll say 60% of all the votes were in that category. And that's if you put all the weapons in there, from the Void Gauntlet to the Rapier. So I think that's actually a great place to be for New World. I think New World overall is extremely balanced. I know people really get upset when we talk about balance because, like, this is OP, this is OP, this is OP. When in actuality, there's a few weapons that might be underperforming in situations, but every single weapon in the game has its case. Even the Void Gauntlet, which you guys rated the worst weapon, and the second worst weapon in the Warhammer, these are both war staples. These are like the most important weapons in wars. So, you know, you guys may have ranked them the worst, but they definitely have their case. Fire Staff, honestly, probably being the weapon that has, I mean, it's awesome. It's great in 3v3s. You know, sword is probably the least on here when it comes to viability, but even then, I think it's an absolute crazy good, like, 1v1 small scale weapon. It is one of my favorite weapons in the game. It's right there with, like, you know, the spear, kind of has that spear-esque play style. So, yeah, I mean, I think, honestly, New World is in a great place for balance, and it is very good, to say the least. Now, maybe Rapier's a little bit too overpowered, which is getting a couple nerfs on the OPR, or on the PTR, and, you know, it's probably deservedly so, but we will see coming next patch where the Greatsword lands and if the Rapier nerfs are actually enough. All right, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Peace.